Poker. You sit down at the table, the cards are dealt, and from there it's simple. 3 of a kind beats 2 pair, flush beats a straight, best hand wins, and most think it's just another game of chance, totally dependent on what cards you get. Sometimes you get lucky and win, right? After all, it's pretty much just another card game. But the more you play, the more you start to realize there's more to it. You start observing the other players, looking for their tendencies or tells, subtle behaviors that give away information, like they fold their arms when they're bluffing or bounce their leg when they have a good hand. And then you try and use those pieces of information to exploit the circumstances to your benefit. It's not just luck. In fact, luck plays a minor part once you start to learn the game. There's a mental aspect that happens beyond the cards that are dealt. Observing tells, making people think you have cards that maybe you don't actually have, using your bets to see how other players react and get information, and it happens independent of the cards. Poker isn't a game of cards played by people. It's a game of people played with cards. In poker terms, when you have a weakness in your game, it's called a leak, because you'll leak money until it gets fixed. It takes careful self-analysis and sometimes some brutal honesty to realize what these weaknesses are in order to address them. Now, I'm not telling you all this because I want everyone to become poker players in order to get better at business. I don't. But what I'm suggesting is that there are parallels between poker and business. Imagine that every time a potential client contacts your firm, it's like getting dealt a new hand. You need to maximize your opportunities and minimize those leaks. And here's where the trouble can start. No one there to answer the phones at lunch? That's a leak. Receptionist sounds distracted. Leak. Don't answer your messages until the next day? Leak. So where do you start? How do you find those leaks and get them fixed before they cost you so much you can't afford to play anymore? So we're talking about today on Lawsome, identifying the problems with and getting the most out of your intake. So, should we deal you in? Let's go.
Lawsome, the podcast for law firms. Powered by Consultwebs.
Welcome back to Lawsome, the only podcast for law firms that waits until the very last possible second to merge into your lane, when we could have easily merged a while back. We're here to inform, educate, and entertain the legal community on the latest in personal and professional developments. I'm Jake Sanders, expat marketing director. And with me is the Mad Max beyond AdWords, Paul Julius. Paul, how's the nuclear winter?
What are we talking about?
Interior decorating.
I guess. We call this color nuclear winter.
Do you have anything in nuclear winter?
Yeah, that's the top 5 signs you don't want to hire this person as an interior designer.
They walk into your living room, they're like, I'm seeing nuclear winter.
Yeah, this concept is nuclear winter.
Oh, I don't know. We got to go a different direction. What's on the show today?
On the show today, we talk about phone mistakes lawyers make with an article by Gina Cho, our favorite Gina Cho. And we speak to advertising legend Harlan Schillinger of Lead Docket about correcting the leaks in law firms' intake processes.
Pull up a plate. It's the Hot Takes Buffet.
The article today is from Above the Law. It's by the inevitable Gina Cho. It's entitled 5 Mistakes to Avoid at Client Intake. The subtitle is just like first dates. The initial client consultation or the first meeting holds a great deal of importance. So she has the 5 mistakes, and one of them, I'll go down the list. Emotional sensitivity. 2, interrogating clients. 3, interruption and distraction. 4, not knowing how to handle questions you don't know the answers to. 5, not trusting your gut / rejecting bad clients. Paul, you found this. We love Gina. What was your take on this?
So I think this article is geared more toward kind of the first client meeting, initial consultation. But I like how these 5 points illustrate everything that can be difficult about intake, because you have to separate some of this stuff out when you're just talking to someone on the phone the first time they're calling your firm. I know, everybody talks about the lawyer brain, and you're flipping this thing on. You're trying to, it's hard to separate yourself from 3 steps ahead and what you're doing, and is this a case or is this not a case? Did I get the facts? Is it is it man 1 or first degree murder?
Right. Well, you got to figure that out. It's crucial question here.
You're getting a little bit ahead of yourself here, and I think it's kind of interesting. And I do want to say one thing about point number 4, and this is something that I learned the hard way. Not knowing how to handle questions you don't know the answer to.
Right.
Please say, I don't know. Let me get back to you on that. Because once you start treading water,
and most lawyers,
people can tell.
Yeah, and most lawyers aren't comfortable with doing that.
No.
And that's a good thing. In a previous lifetime, I worked at a science museum. And I was an educator, and we would be working with, groups of kids or whoever visitors, and somebody would ask a really crazy question about one of the exhibits or how old meteorites are and how could you tell? And they had a class before we were let out into the public or into the museum was like, you can't make things up.
I was going to say you got it.
It was pretty important. And I was like, oh, duh.
When the dinosaurs launched the meteorites,
I know, and there were saddles on every dinosaur, so that helped. But yeah, you can't, and that's not even watered. You're just treading whatever. But that is a huge thing, and thankfully, a lot of lawyers don't get into that because I can't answer that. But then that lies the question: if this is an initial conversation. Maybe you don't need to get that. We're just fact gathering and we're listening here. And my hot take is active listening and self-awareness. Gina kicks off the article and she says it right in the beginning. If she could go back, she would help law schools build into their curriculum a little bit more about what active listening is and what self-awareness is. But I think lawyers should be aware of those things for their consultations on the other end. But initially the intake should be just a formulaic process. And we go through that with Harlan, and lead docket later on in the interview. But I like the idea that Harlan and Gina touch on, and I think it's important. And I find it salient that the business improvements you need to make at your law firm, everyone says, you got to be like a businessman. You got to be like an entrepreneur. You got to be like this. You got to be a chemist, and so the lawyer's sitting there and she's kind of wondering, well, what am I supposed to be? The business improvements are not strictly business related. The improvements are in soft skills, how to change the way you listen, how to change the way you behave and interact with people. That can double your revenue. You can bring in more clients if you install something at the intake level and on the consultation level that includes these active listening, self-awareness, empathic kind of things. It doesn't feel like it's a business improvement. But when you formalize that process, and that's what Harlan was talking about, it's like you got to get back to these manners, bake it in to your process, and then you can really start seeing you're correcting the mistakes and you're actually starting off on a good note, because these mistakes should be avoided because you're going to lose clients.
Absolutely. And we're not saying, you shouldn't talk to people or anything like that.
Or ask them questions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But I think a point Harlan makes is that, the first person to speak to that person who's having a problem and calls your firm is your ambassador. And that's first impressions are huge. And there's a lot. Every other industry spends a lot of time and money working out the different ways, different things to say. I remember years ago, I had a job doing surveys on the phone. Mm-hmm. It's an awful job.
Damn.
Don't ever do that.
Bro.
But I learned, actually it was a research thing. So I wasn't selling anything or anything like that.
Like people mattered when they hung up on you.
It doesn't matter. I was still calling people who didn't want me calling. So anyway, but we had a whole training thing that goes before that. And it was very, very like a binder full of ways to diffuse people who got off of the survey, because the survey had a very specific set of questions and it had to be answered in a specific way, satisfied, not satisfied, whatever. And it would pollute the results if you just started freelancing, like, so, whatever, did you like it or not? No, it had to be answered a specific way. So they had a lot of ways, but everything was very scripted, and they had spent a lot of time and money finding out simple things. Did people respond better to being told all right instead of okay? Stuff like that. And that's kind of what we get into a little bit with Harlan is that there's manners and politeness and responses and simple things that you can do to show that you're engaged and you're compassionate and you're someone that this person can trust and call back, which is a big thing.
And I like that this lead docket, this piece of software that he created, was forged in a law firm to solve a lawyer's problem that lawyer knew he had. So this isn't some kind of Silicon Valley swing by Dropbox, LegalZoom fly by your window piece of software. This is something that was made by lawyers to solve their problems in regards to this process. And once you know you have a problem and you can address it, that's when you can you can correct it. And that's what Gina's talking about. And that's what Harlan's talking about. And that's what we're about to talk about
with Harlan. So let's get to it.
Boom!
After these messages, we'll be right back.
The internet can be a cold and unforgiving place. Every day, thousands of law firm websites go unvisited and unfairly labeled as worthless due to the inattention or misguided attempts at do-it-yourself marketing by their owners. Poor optimization and bad design principles have left these sites unable to realize the full potential of the digital landscape they're forced to exist in, and they're now trapped on page 3 of the search results in an endless cycle of bad management, leading to poor results, leading to disillusionment and loss. There's hope for these neglected websites in the form of a digital marketing company focused exclusively on law firms. Since 1999, Consultwebs has helped hundreds of lawyers connect to thousands of clients across the country using sound marketing principles based off an exhaustive track record of marketing campaigns that have already proven to be successful. If your website is underperforming, call Consultwebs at 800-872-6590 and get the clicks it so desperately needs. Please don't let another day full of unvisited pages go by. Take that step and call today for them.
And now, for a lawsome interview.
Harlan Schillinger has 4 decades of experience in legal advertising with a passion for legal marketing, intake, and conversion. Harlan has worked with more than 120 law firms in over 98 markets throughout North America. Along with his work with Glenn Lerner Injury Attorneys, Harlan's latest project is an intake management software company. He started to help lawyers improve the process and turn more leads into cases. Harlan, thanks for coming back to the show to talk about Lead Docket.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate it. I'm very passionate about it. I will say that it's not a new project. It's been an old project because it started many years ago. It started when lawyers kept calling me and calling our firm. My old advertising agency that I retired from, Network Affiliates, we were receiving telephone calls, from clients saying, give me more leads. I need more leads. And I kind of scratched my head about 12, 14 years ago. And I said, well, what did you do with the last ones? And uniformly, they would say, well, they weren't any good. And I said, well, what do you mean they weren't any good? So you got 100 phone calls and none of them were any good. And I really started to wake up to intake and conversion. Prior to that, we couldn't stop the phone from ringing. 15 years ago, as you know, things changed. The internet entered into the picture. Mm-hmm. The competition entered into the picture. And a lot of lawyers also entered into the picture. But for some reason, intake is very subjective. Lawyers would constantly say, well, I get 94% of everything that I want. And I started to question all of these comments. And I started to really question, when I was a kid growing up in the 60s, T-shirt I used to wear was, question authority. Mm. And by questioning authority, you have to sit back and you say, okay, well, what was so bad about them? And I started to really dissect what was coming into our clients' offices.
So, Harlan, I gotta tell you, I've spoken with many clients and prospective clients and stuff, and And we've talked about a lot of this, driving the leads. And what I hear a lot is lawyers saying, if you could just get my phones ringing, if I can get them on the phone, I can sign up the case. So lawyers answering their own phones, efficient use of office time or costly mistake. I want the lowdown on this and what's the best way to handle the ringing phones.
Well, I don't think that there is one set way to be completely direct with you guys. I shy away from lawyers answering telephones for this business or any busy person answering a telephone. What happens in a law firm is the phone call comes in, goes to the receptionist, which is really your ambassador of first impressions. Depending on how that phone is answered and depending on the tone of the voice and the disposition of that individual will determine everything else from there, by the way. So the law firm thinks that by passing the call to a lawyer, that's the answer because everybody wants to talk to a lawyer. Not true. The fact of the matter is that call has to be screened. And when I talk about screening, you talk about, is it a qualified lead? Is a real person on the other end of the phone? Is it a prank call? The worst thing you can do is pass it to a busy lawyer. A busy lawyer, just imagine they have a brief on their desk. They have to go to court. They have to talk to the last client that they signed up. They have to do everything except to talk to a new client. It's a disruption of their day. And unfortunately, the person that gets that busy lawyer understands and feels that. Because what they feel is they're being rushed. They don't feel the empathy. They don't feel the compassion. The lawyer wants to get through and find out, is this a good case or not? Period, the end. And for that reason, I shy away from having lawyers answer the telephone. Most lawyers are not really telephone friendly. Most people aren't telephone friendly. So if you could really find a lawyer and train that lawyer to be telephone friendly, to be humanistic, to be more than a lawyer answering a legal question, good luck. That's been a challenge. And I've decided to go away from that challenge and open up new ground.
You've been monitoring the situation, legal marketing for 40 years. And I'm wondering are you seeing an erosion of telephonic manners? I'm kind of wondering if there is something coming towards us where people are preferring, people want to get in contact with a firm. Great. You want to do it through text, flare guns, drums, smoke signals, like whatever. Let's get in touch. But I'm wondering if you see a disruption of telephonic manners or culture, because you were just kind of saying most people aren't really good on the phone. And I kind of find that true. Customer service comes naturally to some, and to other people, it's just like, cut the chase, let's get to the facts. So, I mean, have you kind of noticed anything over 40 years?
Well, of course, we all have. I mean, the fact of the matter is, look, I'm going to be 69 years old next month. So I'm an old school kind of guy. When somebody said to me, thank you, the response was, you are welcome. Not, sure. Okay, cool. No problem. And this is a generational thing. And what's going on in this society right now is there is an abandonment of manners. And you know it and I know it. Anybody that wants to be honest with themselves or have a conversation with a younger generation and simply ignores that is foolish. Because there's a tremendous erosion of manners in this. And that falls through to business. It follows through to the dinner table. It follows through to everything that you do. How many times have you been in a situation where you're walking down the street, somebody opens the door, or somebody doesn't open the door for a lady, and they just walk in, and that stare was, whatever happened to manners? Well, if you that telephone answering, you got an entire generation that doesn't know the word thank you. I believe the word was please and thank you. And I'm really pretty adamant about that. I go out of my way when I sit down at a restaurant or I'm interacting with anyone, especially a younger generation who I love and embrace. I love the energy of the Millennium Group. It's electrifying. On the other hand, it's really frustrating, when you say thank you and they go, no problem. And I challenge people on that. I challenge the kid at breakfast, and they don't even know they're doing it. They don't even understand what manners are. That to them is manners. So let's talk about telephone answering manners. Yeah. Somebody is calling a law firm and they're in desperate need of help. They want compassion. Compassion is respect. Respect is tied into manners. listen carefully. Listen very carefully on how the protocol comes about. First thing to say, well, I'm very busy. I have to go pass the call on. But the truth of the matter is that they're not professionally trained. They're not professionally picked. And the ambassador, what I call a first impressions, which is your receptionist, is generally the lowest paid person on the totem pole and considered the least important. But quite frankly, it's the absolute opposite.
So getting a little bit back more towards lead docket and some of the things that you do, you talk about intake scripts and some of these things where you can kind of shore up and start to get a process in there. And it sounds like, being considerate and compassionate and understanding are kind of part of that. Can you tell us a little bit more about the processes and the things that you help clients of Law Docket solidify and get into place?
Well, the essence of lead docket is accountability. And I think that when you're looking at trying to organize something or have a process in place, it has to be accountable. The word process is important. Accountability is important. You have to have a process in place so that you have some roadmap to follow and stay on. And what lead docket does, and I can tell you, we came up with lead docket out of the needs of one of my dearest friends, a gentleman named Dino Colombo, small law firm in Morgantown, West Virginia. Dino was looking around. He understood what he needed. He understood that he needed more of a process. He was doing intake like everybody else. They're either putting up a screen and answering questions that goes into a case management system that you can't get information out of, or they were putting it on legal pads, or a fancy intake sheet. And that was the process. The process was to take all the calls from today and call everybody back tomorrow, unless there was an interruption or the folder got misplaced or something else came or the boss wanted coffee or whatever disruption you want to come up with. And does that sound familiar, people? That was the process. And so what I set out to do and what Dino set out to do and our brilliant partner, Eric Kaufman, set out to do was develop a piece of software for his own office. I came along and I said, this is applicable to anyone. I'm looking for this. I am dying to get into this business because I am so tired of the lack of accountability. And what Lead Docket did was it formalized the intake process in many, many respects. When the phone rings, it's completely recorded. So I have an opportunity to record a telephone call and know exactly what's being said for training purposes, of course. We have an opportunity to find out exactly where the call came from, where the value of the call, how your marketing is working, which gives you an absolute ROI at the end of the year for planning. It puts the call into a complete tracking mechanism, path, a workflow. It allows the call to be tracked. First of all, it allows you to respond back to the caller with a thank you, a text or email. Very similar to the way the medical industry has embraced appointment gathering and communication, because it's all about communication. And in addition, Lead Docket does many other things. It works simultaneously with your case management system. My goal in Lead Docket was three things. Number one, I wanted to make it user-friendly so people would use it. Number two, I wanted to make it absolutely flexible so that it can be customized to your quirks and needs of an office and an individual that's buying it. And number three, I wanted to make it affordable and half the price of any other piece of equipment that's on the marketplace, but more functional, more robust, more reportable, and all of the things that we built into Lead Docket. We don't sell Lead Docket on the open floor. It's an invited process. If you're interested, we will entertain having you as a client. We're not snobs. We just want to filter out people that really are just tire kicking and really are not committed to the process. So that's a little scoop on Lead Docket.
My favorite part about this is a lot of legal tech people are talking about, I was doing some research for a future show, and it was about apps, law firms using apps, and, the opinions on those run the gambit. But it's interesting that there's all this flood of cash, and the reality is that a lot of people aren't using these apps. They're not using these legal tech startup things as much as the investors would want, because I think it's created outside of the problem zone. And Lead Docket was created in a law firm while it was running, and the phone was ringing, and we had to turn it on and off, and they came in at 8 and they left at 5, and we solved the problems here. That's exciting. And that's where the investment should come from, because you're solving the problems on, like, in situ. It just kind of feels right. And I think a lot of these other things don't.
Well, let's talk about the nitty gritty and the reality of law firms and software and apps and such. First of all, these are true figures. There's approximately 400 pieces of software that are out in the field right now that are working with approximately 4,000 advertising law firms. There's about 4,000 law firms that are on television. Let's just look at television for a minute. And there's hundreds of thousands on the internet, on radio. But let's talk on television. Out of 4,000 advertisers on television, there's only 400 law firms that have embraced any kind of technology or software that will quantify and manage the process of intake. So the problem really is systemic. The problem begins with what you don't know, you don't know. Law firms are arrogant. Lawyers are arrogant. You cannot tell a lawyer that he can do much better when he's already doing very well. It just doesn't go anywhere. The arrogance of it is overshadowing the solution and the problem. If you don't recognize you have a problem, how can you fix it? When Dino Colombo recognized he had a problem and he wanted to eliminate his problem, or increase his opportunities, he sat down and looked for a solution. Law firms don't really address issues that way. They don't address issues on intake. They don't address issues on personnel. And it's a systemic problem, and maybe because they really don't teach business in law school. But the truth of the matter, and this is my personal opinion, is that they're making so much money, or they have the opportunity to make so much money, they buy their way out of problems, and they don't realize what they're leaving on the table. They understand what they're taking from the table. And I believe that's really where it begins. So when you talk about apps, when you talk about software, when you talk about, if you don't know you have a problem, or you don't know where your opportunity is, then it goes unresolved. But think about those figures for a minute. Think about every law firm that you do business with. Think about every law firm that's out there. And tell me, what system do they have? What process do they have? And they have a process, but it's a flawed process because there's no accountability.
So when you're talking about accountability, I think 2 Lead Docket features jumped out at us was the automation and the analytics, because those are difficult to integrate and understand from a systems point of view for lawyers or people who are helping run law firms. So what can you do to kind of break apart automation and analytics, like as Lead Docket handles it, and how do they bring accountability to that intake process?
To answer your first question, it's a systematic approach with a defined process. There's a system in place. There's a defined process. So the military has a defined process. You have a defined process on how to do homework if you ever really struggled with having to do homework. Mm. It's a workflow. Mm. And that's answering your very first question. Mm-hmm. Excuse me.
No.
The second part of the question, and we can come back to the first, is keeping track and being accountable. The old joke about having a checkbook, there must be money in it. I have checks. And you keep writing checks.
Right.
The system of accountability is really very easy. Again, I go back to, and I always use the expression or the analogy of eating a big steak in a great steakhouse. You can't eat a 16-ounce steak, but you'd sure well enjoy ordering it. And you don't care what's left over because you're so full from eating the first half. and you can't wait to come back and pay your bill, and you can't wait to get out of there so you can come back. That's the analogy. And intake and running a law firm is somewhat similar. You pay so much and you put so much energy to make the phone ring, and you take a portion of that business, but the majority of the calls that come in are unresolved. They're unresolved for many reasons. Putting aside the crazy people that call a law firm, putting aside the fact that it just simply is not a case and there's no insurance and all the particulars. But let's not put aside the victim that has to talk to their spouse. Let's not put aside the victim that's shopping or that says, I'm not ready to make a decision. There's a myriad of reasons people don't buy on the first phone call. How do you track all that? You track it by paper. You track it by an Excel spreadsheet. There's many ways to track it. I think having a very systematic and defined process of tracking is the most useful way of doing it. It's not a sophisticated way of doing it. It's just an accurate way of doing it. Coming from an agency background, it's really, really important to understand analytics. It's very important to understand where calls are coming from, where cases are coming from, what's the value of the case that you're making the phone ring for. And from an advertising point of view, and I don't know any advertising agency that has embraced metrics, because they too are busy trying to make the phone ring.
Yeah.
But I recognized early on that if I can take a good look at where the calls are coming from, where I can point the advertising to getting more calls. So understanding the analytics, understanding those two factors are the heartbeat of intake and conversion. Systematic approach to a defined process and keeping track, accountability.
We get that a lot too. I've heard it and I think part of it is maybe avoidance. Like, people want to think they're doing better than they really are. You start to sometimes, people secret shop a law firm. There's companies that'll do that and call them up and pretend to have a case or whatever. And I think a lot of times what the firm's opinion of their intake is and what an unflinching look at it is are kind of two different things. So,
well, one's reality and one's a fantasy, and I'm going to jump right into this, and I'll be perfectly frank with you gentlemen and the audience. There is only one real way to know exactly what's going on your phone. It's to record your telephone calls. I don't believe in I've outgrown making ghost calls, making phony calls, because that's kind of hit and miss. You may, hit somebody on a good day or a bad day. There's no consistency in that. But what the reality of, and almost every phone system can do this, certainly Lead Docket can do this with that, and it's a built-in feature, is if you record telephone calls, they'll know exactly what's going on. If you want to get the attention of an arrogant lawyer that says, I get 94% of everything that I want, record their phone calls and play it back to them. They will go, oh my God, I didn't realize that. Oh, really? I didn't know that. That is a very polite, I am in such denial that you had to really beat me over the head, didn't you?
Yeah.
And at that point, keep in mind, only a few people really do something about it. They think they're doing something about it. But understand the process. I mean, look, you have a problem with a credit card. You have a problem with anything in this day and age. You get somebody on the telephone and they say, this phone call is being recorded. It's being recorded so that you can retrain, know what you have, know what's going on, and eliminate all the bull. That is the only pure process that exists.
Man, this is so wonderful. And this last question, I think you've answered it 50 different ways, but I just wanted you to kind of envision that you're on your motorcycle and you're pulling up and you see that there's a lawyer next to you, and it's obvious that they're struggling with their intake department, and you could just tell, but you only have the red light to give them a piece of advice. What quick pit stop advice would you give this lawyer about their intake department?
I'd say, lawyer, record every telephone call.
Yeah.
Have metrics in place. Stop being in denial. Sit down with me and I'll show you what you're missing, not what you're getting.
That's it, man. Harlan, how can people learn more about you and Lead Docket?
Well, I'm somewhat of a known commodity. You can Google me, Harlan Schillinger. A couple of pages come up. A lot of it's propaganda and stuff about my motorcycle group.
Hearsay.
And charity work. Yeah, hearsay, I guess. These days we're skeptical about the press, so there's a bunch of articles there. But you can go to leaddocket.com and you can check it out from there. I want to be very, very clear. Unless you understand that there's opportunity and recognize that intake and conversion is the biggest hole in your bucket, there's no need to go any further. If you understand that this is a business issue that exists in every business, and you want to increase your business substantially without spending more money, there's an opportunity there for you.
For show notes, links, and info, go to thelawsonepodcast.com or follow us on Twitter or Facebook. Be sure to leave us a review and rating in iTunes or wherever you find the you listen to. Until next week, stay lawsome.